The Sterling Tower stood like a blade of glass against the New York sky, its windows catching the dying sunlight and scattering it across the city. 47 stories of power and wealth, a monument to ambition. Yet inside, on the 36th floor, a 10-year-old boy sat alone in a room meant to shape legacies. Michael Sterling, his shoulders curled inward as if the weight of the world pressed down on his narrow frame. His fingers clutched a marker so tightly it might have snapped in two. The whiteboard in front of him was covered with numbers that blurred into meaningless patterns. They mocked him. Every wrong answer echoed in his mind like a verdict. Failure, failure, failure. For most children, grades were marks on paper. For Michael, they were wounds carved into his mother's face. Each test another disappointment in her cold, perfect eyes. Outside the glass door, the tower hummed with its nightly rhythm. Employees had long since left, leaving only the low throb of fluorescent lights and the faint buzz of a vacuum somewhere in the distance. That's when Michael noticed him, a man pushing a cart. His uniform was dark, simple, his hands rough from years of work. He carried a mop bucket, rags, bottles that smelled faintly of bleach. But his eyes, steady, deep, impossibly kind, stopped Michael cold. Robert Flynn. The janitor paused. He watched the boy, marker trembling in his grip, eyes clouded with the same helplessness Robert had once seen in his own daughter when the world felt too heavy. For a long moment, neither moved. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the squeak of the mop wheels. Then Robert's gaze shifted to the whiteboard. His face softened with recognition. Not pity, but something else. Something sharper. Knowledge. Downstairs, Sophia Sterling, Michael's mother, reviewed numbers of her own. In her office high above the city, quarterly reports lay in neat stacks across her desk. At 38, she had built an empire from the ashes of her late husband's fortune. Her platinum hair gleamed in the light. Her tailored suit was immaculate. She was the kind of woman who could silence a boardroom with a glance. But tonight, her mind wasn't on profits. It was on her son. The report in her hands was no financial summary. It was Michael's grades, or rather his failures. 73% failure rate across all subjects. Even art. She gripped the paper tighter. This wasn't just about Michael anymore. It was about the Sterling name, the empire she carried on her shoulders. And her son, her only child, was slipping through her fingers like water. Her heels echoed as she strode down the corridor toward the tutoring room. Each click was a countdown, every step bringing her closer to another confrontation she dreaded but could not avoid. Michael didn't even look up when she entered. Tear tracks had dried on his cheeks. In her composed, commanding voice, Sophia delivered the ultimatum. If you cannot improve by the end of this quarter, Michael, I will send you to Thornfield Academy. They will fix what I cannot. Her words fell like stones into still water. Each syllable rippled across the boy's chest, filling him with dread. Thornfield was a boarding school in Connecticut, famous for its strict discipline and rigid schedules. Michael knew what it meant. Exile. Being sent away. Her heels clicked again as she left, fading into silence. Michael sat frozen, his chest tight, his heart a drumbeat of panic. The tower grew still. The city outside glittered, alive with energy, but up here, Michael felt trapped in a cage of marble and glass. He wandered into the hallway, desperate for air, for anything to distract him from the suffocating pressure. And then he saw it. A whiteboard, propped against the wall, beside a water fountain. On it, written in neat, flowing handwriting, was an equation. Physics, but not the kind his tutors droned about. This one seemed alive. The symbols curved like a dance. The numbers leaned into one another, as if whispering secrets. Robert stood beside it, marker in hand. He was so focused, he didn't notice Michael at first. His movements were precise, practiced, almost graceful. When Michael's shadow fell across the board, Robert looked up. His first instinct was to apologize, to erase the evidence of this trespass. But something in the boy's wide eyes stopped him. Not judgment. Not dismissal. Curiosity. It's about trajectory, Robert said softly, his voice carrying a strange warmth in the sterile hallway. Like throwing a ball. Math predicts where it lands. Michael blinked. His tutors had made this same concept sound impossible, but Robert's explanation felt human. Simple. My tutor makes it seem harder, Michael admitted, almost whispering. Most things are simpler than people make them, Robert replied, then hesitated. His role was to remain invisible, not to teach, not to step into this boy's world. He reached for the eraser. Wait, Michael said quickly, surprising even himself. His voice trembled, but his eyes were steady. Could you show me? The question hung in the air, fragile as glass. Robert's heart clenched. He knew he should say no. He was a janitor, a nobody. The son of the Sterling Empire shouldn't be learning from him. But then he remembered his own daughter, Sarah, the way she once looked at him when struggling through a problem, waiting for him to make sense of the chaos. He sighed, set down the eraser, and pulled over a chair. Sit, he said gently. Michael obeyed. For the next hour, the sterile corporate hallway became a classroom unlike any other. Robert told stories about astronauts and baseball players, turning equations into adventures. He drew diagrams that looked like comic book panels. He compared gravity to the Earth, giving everything a hug. Michael laughed. For the first time in weeks, he laughed. The numbers didn't feel like enemies anymore. They felt like puzzles, like secret stories waiting to be solved. Neither noticed the shadow that eventually fell across them. Sophia Sterling. She had returned for a forgotten file, and instead found her son sitting cross-legged on the floor, laughing over equations with the janitor. Her face tightened. Surprise, confusion, and then something closer to anger. Michael, she said, her voice sharp, commanding. Gather your things. Now. Michael scrambled, the laughter draining from his face. Robert rose, slow but steady, his eyes meeting Sophia's without flinching. I apologize, Miss Sterling, he said, his voice calm. The boy seemed upset, and I thought. You thought wrong, she snapped, though her tone lacked its usual steel. She had seen her son smiling. That she couldn't ignore. Mom, he was just helping, Michael began, but she silenced him with a raised hand. We'll discuss this at home. Her heels clicked against the marble as they walked toward the elevator. Just before the doors closed, Michael turned back. Robert gave him a single nod, a silent promise. Michael held onto that nod like a lifeline as the doors sealed shut between them. What happens when the secret teacher leaves his first trail of lessons, hidden in a boy's backpack, and a forbidden friendship begins to grow in the shadows of a skyscraper? The days that followed were a blur of gray for Michael Sterling. Tutors droned on in their polished voices, their explanations heavy with jargon and expectation. Equations still looked like strangers on a page, and every practice test felt like another reminder that he wasn't good enough. But inside him, something had shifted. It wasn't the numbers that haunted him anymore. It was the memory of that night. The way Robert Flynn had made math feel like an adventure. The way his laughter had chased away the heavy silence that usually filled his study sessions. And above all, that nod, that silent promise that whispered, this isn't over. 3 nights later, Michael found something in his backpack. At first, he thought it was just another worksheet his tutor had slipped in. But when he unrolled the paper, his heart leapt. It wasn't like anything his tutors had given him before. The problems were written in the same neat, artistic handwriting he had seen on the whiteboard. Only these weren't boring drills. One problem told the story of pirates dividing up treasure on a hidden island. Another asked about astronauts rationing oxygen on their way back to Earth. A third described race car drivers calculating the fastest pit stop strategy. At the bottom of the page, a short note. Learning should be an adventure. RF. Michael stared at the paper, his lips curving into a smile he hadn't worn in weeks. He grabbed his pencil, and for the first time, he wasn't solving problems because he had to. He was solving them because he wanted to know what happened next. Would the pirates find their treasure? Would the astronauts make it home? That night, he finished every single problem. The next morning, before school, he slipped his solutions under the door of the janitor's supply closet. His hands trembled as he slid the paper through the crack, but his heart raced with something new, excitement. At the bottom of his work, he had written a reply. "The astronauts made it. Thank you." And with that, the secret exchange began. For the next 2 weeks, the boy and the janitor lived a double life. By day, Michael sat through official lessons, still staring blankly at his tutor's stiff diagrams and rigid instructions. By night, however, his backpack carried treasures, pages of word problems disguised as adventures. One evening, he found himself grinning as he read about knights trying to build a catapult with perfect trajectory. Another time, he worked through riddles about dragons and their hoarded gold. Every page was a new story, and every story held a secret piece of knowledge buried inside. And the more he solved them, the more Michael changed. At first, it was subtle. He walked a little taller. His hands no longer shook when he picked up a pencil. Soon, even his official tests began to improve. Small gains at first, then steady progress. His tutors congratulated themselves, certain their methods had finally clicked. But Sophia Sterling noticed something they didn't. Her son wasn't just scoring higher. He was happier. She saw it when he demonstrated physics concepts at the dinner table using tennis balls and oranges. She heard it when he explained fractions like jokes, laughter woven through his examples. She even caught him once, humming softly as he worked through homework. It was as though the boy she thought was slipping away had suddenly returned, brighter, more alive than ever. But secrets never stay buried for long. One evening, Michael stayed late at the tower, hoping to catch Robert in the hallway. Instead, he stumbled upon something else. Robert's cleaning cart stood unattended, a worn leather notebook resting on top. Its pages had been left open, fluttering slightly in the air conditioning. Michael hesitated, then leaned closer. The notebook wasn't about cleaning. It was filled with lesson plans, strategies for teaching different learning styles, diagrams of math problems turned into games, notes about how to explain concepts through stories, metaphors, and play. And on the inside cover, written in faded ink, "Property of Mr. Robert Flynn, Riverside Elementary, Excellence in Mathematics Education Award, 2015. Michael's eyes widened. Robert wasn't just a janitor. He had been a teacher, an award-winning teacher. Michael pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the page. That evening, he showed it to his mother. Sophia stared at the screen for a long, silent moment. Her lips parted, but no words came. She had dismissed Robert as invisible, as unimportant. Yet here was proof that the man pushing a mop had once stood at the front of a classroom, celebrated for the very thing her son had been missing. "Why would a teacher become a janitor?" she murmured, almost to herself. Michael looked up at her, with eyes older than his years. Maybe he had reasons. Good people sometimes get stuck in hard times. Sophia's hand tightened around the phone. She didn't know how to answer that. The secret partnership grew bolder. Robert's lessons became Michael's lifeline. Each night, Michael searched his backpack with anticipation, eager to discover the next adventure waiting for him. Each morning, he returned his completed work with quiet pride, sometimes adding small notes. The pirates found the treasure. The knight's catapult worked. The astronauts made it home again. And through it all, Robert replied with new puzzles, new adventures, new lessons that breathed life into numbers and words. But time was running out. The National Scholarship Examination was approaching. Sterling Enterprises itself was sponsoring it. 20 students would win full scholarships to the country's most prestigious schools. The tests would be brutal, the competition fierce. And for the first time in his life, Michael wanted to try. Not because his mother demanded it. Not because failing meant Thornfield. But because Robert had shown him something his tutors never could. That learning wasn't about perfection. It was about curiosity, about discovery, about joy. When Sophia confronts Robert in the shadows of a tower, she discovers the truth behind why an award-winning teacher became a janitor. But what she learns may shatter her assumptions and force her to choose between pride and possibility. The Sterling Tower slept beneath the Manhattan sky. Most offices were dark now, glowing only with the ghostly reflections of the city lights. The echo of footsteps had long faded, leaving the building to its quiet guardians, the hum of the air vents, the buzz of fluorescent lights, and the man pushing a mop bucket through marble corridors. Robert Flynn. Tonight, though, he wasn't alone. Sophia Sterling's heels clicked against the polished floor as she walked through the near-empty halls. She told herself she was here to review quarterly reports, but the truth was harder to admit. She was restless, uneasy. Ever since Michael had shown her that photograph of Robert's notebook, the image of the words Excellence in Mathematics Education Award had gnawed at her. Why was an award-winning teacher scrubbing her floors? Her feet carried her, almost against her will, to the supply closet on the 36th floor. The door was open. Inside, Robert was mixing cleaning solution, measuring each chemical with the precision of someone who had once measured equations. His hands moved methodically, like a man who found order in small rituals. "Mr. Flynn," Sophia said, her voice sharp in the silence. Robert turned, unsurprised, his gaze steady, calm. "Miss Sterling." They regarded each other across the small, dimly lit room. Two single parents, both carrying the heavy weight of their children's futures, both cloaked in very different worlds. Sophia had come armed with questions, with accusations even. But the moment she looked into Robert's eyes, her rehearsed words crumbled. What came out instead was softer, almost hesitant. "Why didn't you tell anyone about your teaching background?" Robert's hand stilled. He set the bottle down, wiping his palms on a rag, and leaned back against the counter. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy and fragile. When he finally spoke, his voice carried no bitterness, only raw honesty. "Because I'm not that person anymore." Sophia blinked. "What do you mean?" Robert exhaled slowly, eyes flickering toward the floor as though searching for strength there. "My wife, she died 7 years ago. Cancer." His throat tightened, but he pushed on. The medical bills swallowed everything. Teaching didn't pay enough to cover them. Not with her treatments. Not with my daughter's asthma. I tried to hold it together, tried to keep the classroom alive, but every time I stood in front of my students, I'd see her empty chair at parent conferences. I couldn't do it anymore. Sophia's lips parted, but no words came. "I needed work that was simpler," Robert continued. "Something that didn't demand smiles and speeches. Something that let me be home for Sarah during the day and earn enough at night to keep her breathing." He gave a small, humorless smile. "Cleaning pays better than teaching ever did. It's honest work. That's enough for me." The rawness in his words dismantled Sophia's armor, piece by piece. She no longer saw a janitor, no longer even saw a teacher. She saw a father, a man clawing against the world to protect the only thing that mattered, his child. And suddenly, she recognized herself in him. Different choices, different circumstances, but the same desperate fight for family. Her voice, usually sharp as glass, softened. "Michael has improved. His tutors are baffled." Robert gave a quiet chuckle. "Michael's brilliant. He just needed someone to show him that learning isn't about being perfect. It's about being curious." Sophia tilted her head, studying him. "Is that the secret you've been teaching him?" "Part of it," Robert admitted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn slip of paper, the kind he had been slipping into Michael's backpack. He held it out to her. She unfolded it. The problem was simple at first glance. A mother bird teaching her chicks to fly, calculating distance and wind speed. But beneath the numbers lay something deeper. A story about courage. About trust. "The real secret," Robert said quietly, "is that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the stepping stone to understanding. Every wrong answer teaches us something about finding the right one." Sophia's fingers lingered on the page. For years, she had believed success was all that mattered. Clean numbers, flawless reports, perfection at any cost. Yet here was a man with calloused hands and a janitor's uniform teaching her son a truth she had never considered. She swallowed, fighting to keep her composure. "I could arrange proper compensation, set up a formal schedule." Robert shook his head. His voice was gentle, but firm. "No. The moment it becomes official, it becomes obligation. Michael doesn't need another obligation. He needs to remember that learning can be joy." Sophia stared at him, caught between pride and gratitude. between her world of contracts and his world of quiet truths. For once, she let silence fill the space between them. That night, they parted without agreement, yet with something stronger than any contract. An unspoken understanding. Robert would continue his secret lessons. Sophia would pretend not to notice. And Michael would grow in the freedom they created between expectation and discovery. But soon, the outside world would intrude. The National Scholarship Examination loomed, a test so grueling that even the most gifted students struggled. Michael wanted to try, not to please his mother, not to avoid punishment, but because for the first time he believed he could. Sophia watched her son prepare, torn between fear and pride. She surrounded him with tutors, practice books, consultants. Yet deep down, she knew the real change in him had not come from any of those. It had come from the janitor, from the man who told stories about pirates and astronauts, from word problems hidden in the pages of adventure. And she began to wonder, could she really trust the future of her son, her legacy, to a man who carried a mop? The day of the examination arrives. Cameras flash, parents watch from the gallery, and Michael sits trembling at desk number 47. But in the crowd's shadows stands Robert, silent, unseen, carrying the only lesson that truly matters. Will Michael rise, or will fear consume him? The morning of the scholarship exam arrived wrapped in an unusual warmth for spring. Manhattan shimmered under sunlight, the streets alive with honking taxis and hurried footsteps. But inside the Sterling Enterprises conference hall, silence ruled. Rows of desks stretched endlessly across the polished floor, each bearing a number, each waiting for a nervous child. At the back, in a gallery overlooking the room, parents whispered in hushed tones, their voices a mix of pride, anxiety, and expectation. Cameras clicked quietly. The press was here too. After all, the scholarships were Sterling Enterprises' grand gesture, a symbol of legacy, philanthropy, and opportunity. Michael Sterling sat at desk number 47. His lucky number, ever since Robert had once explained prime numbers to him through a story about unique snowflakes. But luck alone couldn't quiet the pounding in his chest. He stared at the thick booklet before him. It felt impossibly heavy, like it contained not just questions, but his entire future. From the gallery above, Sophia watched with perfectly measured calm. Her fingers were laced in her lap, but her knuckles were pale from the pressure. Outwardly composed, but inside she was terrified. And somewhere along the edge of the hall, wearing his janitor's uniform and pretending to check the ventilation, stood Robert Flynn. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But his steady presence filled the room like a quiet promise. The proctor's voice echoed, "You may begin." Michael opened the booklet. The panic hit instantly. Numbers blurred. Words swirled into nonsense. His throat tightened, and his pencil hovered uselessly above the page. His mind screamed, "I can't. I can't. I can't." But then, in the chaos of his thoughts, a voice emerged. "Breathe. Read. Understand. Every problem is just a story waiting for an ending." Robert's voice. Michael inhaled. Slowly. Then again. The world steadied. He looked at the first question, geometry. But instead of dry shapes, he saw it differently. A ship's sails cutting across the wind, angles determining its course. Pirates steering toward treasure. He grinned despite himself. The second question, physics. He imagined astronauts in their capsule, counting oxygen tanks, calculating their survival. Numbers became lifelines. Equations became hope. By the third, he was smiling. His pencil flew across the page. He wasn't solving problems anymore. He was finishing adventures. Up in the gallery, Sophia leaned forward. She could see it, the transformation. The hunched shoulders straightened. The nervous tapping stopped. Focus radiated from her son like light. She searched the room until her gaze found Robert at the far edge. Their eyes met. He nodded once, small, almost imperceptible, but powerful. She felt something inside her shift, a recognition. He had given her son something she could not. Courage. The exam dragged on for 3 hours. Some students finished early, leaving with triumph or defeat carved into their faces. Michael stayed until the final moment, not because he struggled, but because he was careful. He checked his work like Robert had taught him, making sure every astronaut made it home, every pirate found their gold. When the proctor called, "Pencils down," Michael laid his pencil on the desk with hands that no longer trembled. He looked up, first at his mother, then at Robert, and both saw the same thing in his face, not just relief, not just pride, but joy. The hall erupted in low murmurs as students filed out. But Michael didn't follow the others. Instead, he walked straight across the room, weaving past rows of desks, ignoring whispers. And then, in front of the crowd, in front of the cameras, he threw his arms around Robert. Gasps rippled through the hall. Parents froze. Reporters clicked furiously. A billionaire's son, embracing the janitor. Robert stiffened, then let the boy cling to him. His hands trembled as he returned the hug, his heart pounding. From the gallery, Sophia rose. Her heels clicked against the floor as she descended into the crowd. People parted, expecting sharp reprimands, a scandal smoothed over by corporate polish. Instead, she stopped before Robert and extended her hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, clear enough for the cameras to hear. "For seeing what I couldn't, for teaching what I didn't know how to teach." The hall went silent. Robert looked at her hand, then at Michael, then back at her. Slowly, he reached out, his callous palm meeting her manicured fingers. The contrast was stark, but in that moment, it didn't matter. "Every child has their own way of learning," Robert replied. Michael just needed someone to help him find his. The cameras captured it all, the handshake that shattered boundaries, the boy smiling between them. The janitor revealed not as a cleaner of floors, but a builder of futures. That evening, headlines lit up across the city. Billionaire's son finds genius in janitor's lessons. The teacher in the shadows. The secret that saved the sterling legacy. Sophia tried at first to control the story, to frame it as corporate philanthropy. But as days passed, she realized something. She didn't want to control it. The narrative wasn't about sterling enterprises. It wasn't about wealth or reputation. It was about something simpler, more profound. That wisdom could be found in unexpected places. That kindness mattered more than titles. That knowledge belonged to everyone. Michael's results arrive. Sophia faces a choice. And Robert, once invisible, is offered something that could change his life forever. But what will happen when personal bonds, corporate power, and love itself intertwine in ways none of them expected? 2 weeks after the examination, an envelope arrived. The kind that carried futures inside. Michael sat at the long oak table in his mother's office, the city glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. His hands trembled as he tore the seal, pulling out the results. His eyes widened. Then he looked up, breathless. "Mom, I passed. 92nd percentile." Sophia's composure cracked. For the first time in years, tears welled in her eyes. She pulled her son into her arms, clutching him as though she'd nearly lost him and only just gotten him back. And across the room, leaning against the wall in his janitor's uniform, Robert smiled quietly. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The media celebrated. The story of the billionaire's son and the janitor spread like wildfire. Reporters called it the Sterling Miracle. Scholars dissected it. Parents whispered about it at playgrounds and dinner tables. The board of Sterling Enterprises urged Sophia to capitalize on the publicity. "Start a foundation," they said. "Hire Flynn as director. Make it official." Sophia drafted proposals, typed contracts, arranged frameworks. But as she looked at the documents, something in her tightened. What had happened between Robert and Michael hadn't been corporate. It had been human. And she feared turning it into an institution would strip away its truth. So she did something unexpected. One evening, she walked to the 36th floor supply closet, where Robert was buffing the conference room floor. His daughter, Sarah, 7 years old, bright-eyed, her inhaler peeking from her backpack, sat nearby doing homework. "Mr. Flynn," Sophia began. Then, catching herself, she softened. "Robert." He looked up, surprised, but said nothing. "I don't want to hire you," she said simply. His brow furrowed, But before he could answer, she continued. I want to partner with you. He waited, silent, steady. I want to build a learning center inside Sterling Enterprises. Not for executives' children. For all employees' families. A place where learning is joy. Where failure is just another step toward understanding. She looked at him directly. And I want you to run it. Not as a janitor who teaches, but as a teacher who happens to be a janitor. Robert froze, his hand resting on the mop handle. He turned toward his daughter, who was pretending to be absorbed in her workbook, but clearly listening. What do you think, Princess? He asked softly. Should Daddy go back to teaching? Sarah looked up, her eyes shining. Only if you tell the pirate stories. Robert laughed, a sound that filled the sterile conference room with warmth. Then he nodded once. All right. 3 months later, the Sterling Learning Center opened. The space, once a forgotten storage wing, was transformed into a laboratory of imagination. Walls painted with murals of galaxies and forests. Desks arranged not in rows, but in circles, inviting conversation. Whiteboards covered with colorful doodles, stories hidden in numbers. Michael became its first unofficial mentor, helping younger kids find adventures in their homework. Sarah was always nearby, her laughter filling the air, her breathing easier in the clean ventilation system Sophia had installed just for her. Employees from every floor, mailroom clerks, accountants, even executives, brought their children. For the first time, titles didn't matter. Curiosity did. And in the evenings, Sophia often found herself there too, watching, listening, smiling at the sound of children laughing as they learned. Seasons passed. Autumn painted the city gold and amber. Robert scribbled little notes for Sophia, not math problems this time, but observations about Michael's progress, about Sarah's health, about how certain sunsets made the skyline look like geometry. Their conversations stretched long after the children went home. Dreams, fears, memories. Sometimes their hands brushed over shared papers. And slowly, gently, they stopped pulling away. It wasn't a fairy tale romance. It was something steadier, something real, built not on perfection, but on patience, respect, and shared hope. Winter came with snow that turned the city into a crystalline puzzle. Robert taught children about fractals, about the mathematics hidden in snowflakes. Sophia canceled board meetings to join snowball fight experiments in the corporate courtyard. Laughter echoed between skyscrapers. Michael flourished, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Sarah grew stronger, her asthma easing with treatment and love. And Sophia herself, once a woman of sharp edges and cold composure, began to soften. She was still formidable, but now her strength carried gentleness too. Spring brought choices. Michael's scholarship gave him the chance to attend the nation's most elite boarding schools. Invitations poured in. But one evening, over dinner with Robert and Sarah, he set down his fork and spoke with quiet conviction. I don't want to leave. Harrison Day School has accepted me. They've got an innovative math program, and I can still help at the center. Sophia opened her mouth to argue, to talk about prestige, about legacy. But then her eyes met Robert's, and she understood. This wasn't her decision. It was Michael's. She smiled faintly. It's your choice. And she meant it. The year ended with a showcase at the Learning Center. Children presented math through plays and stories. Pirates divided treasure on stage. Astronauts explained oxygen levels in mock capsules. Even dragons got their turn with compound interest. Parents laughed, applauded, wiped tears from their eyes. In the middle of it all, Michael presented his project. A problem about two different paths intersecting at exactly the right moment. A single father, a CEO, meeting in the space between expectation and discovery. Sophia and Robert stood together at the back, their children beside them, and knew he was right. Some equations were too beautiful to be coincidence. Years later, Michael would study theoretical physics, approaching the universe with the curiosity Robert had given him. Sarah would grow into a teacher like her father, carrying forward the legacy of joy in learning. Sophia would transform Sterling Enterprises into a model of humanity and profit working hand in hand. And Robert? He would keep teaching. Not just numbers, but courage, resilience, and wonder. Because he had learned, too, that failure was never the end, only another beginning. One spring afternoon, beneath cherry blossoms turning the city into a poem, Robert and Sophia would marry. Michael and Sarah stood as their witnesses, smiling as a family that was imperfect, unexpected, and utterly complete. But that's the future. For now, on this night, in a room filled with children laughing over lessons, Michael looked up from his work and caught Robert's eye. He mouthed 2 words silently. "Thank you." Robert's eyes shone as he mouthed back, "Thank you too." Because in the end, they had all been teachers. They had all been students. And the lessons they shared together would outlive every grade, every exam, every polished report. The greatest secret was never about passing tests. It was this: every person carries wisdom worth discovering. Every failure is just understanding in disguise. And love, like learning, grows strongest when nurtured with patience, kindness, and the courage to see beyond the surface, to the truth that lies beneath. If you were Michael's mother, would you have trusted the janitor or dismissed him? And have you ever discovered wisdom from the most unexpected person in your life?